The clock on the restaurant wall showed 9:47 p.m., but Jessica felt like she had been on her feet for days. Her black shoes squeaked against the polished floor as she hurried between tables, balancing plates and forcing smiles despite the exhaustion weighing down her shoulders. 3 months of double shifts had taken their toll, but she couldn't afford to slow down, not when her little brother needed her. Romano's was the kind of upscale restaurant where wealthy people came to seal business deals over expensive wine. The kind of place where a single meal cost more than Jessica made in 2 days of waiting tables. She had learned to blend into the background, to be invisible while serving the kind of people who lived in a completely different world than hers. Tonight felt different, though. Maybe it was because she was extra tired, or maybe because the medical bills sitting on her kitchen table kept growing bigger every week. Her brother David was only 16, and the doctors said his treatment couldn't wait much longer. Every plate she carried, every smile she forced, every tip she earned brought her a little closer to the money they desperately needed. Jessica had always been good with numbers, but the math of their situation never worked out right. Rent, groceries, gas money, college classes, and now medical bills that seemed to multiply faster than she could pay them. Some nights, she lay awake wondering if she should drop out of college completely and work even more hours. Her dream of becoming a music teacher felt selfish when David needed surgery. Music had been her escape since childhood. When their parents worked late shifts at the factory, Jessica would sit at the old piano in their tiny apartment and play until the neighbors complained. She taught herself by watching YouTube videos and checking out library books. Later, a kind teacher at school helped her get a scholarship for proper lessons. For years, music was the one thing that made sense in a world that often felt unfair. But pianos don't pay bills. Beautiful melodies don't cure sick brothers. So Jessica hung up her dreams like winter clothes in summer, tucked away until she could afford to take them out again. These days, the only music in her life was the soft humming she did while working, usually melodies that popped into her head when she wasn't thinking about anything else. The restaurant's dining room buzzed with quiet conversations and the gentle clink of expensive silverware against fine china. Jessica weaved through the tables, refilling water glasses and clearing plates, when she noticed the group of men at table 12. They were different from the usual crowd. Younger, more casual, but clearly wealthy based on their clothes and confidence. One man in particular caught her attention. He was probably in his early 30s, wearing jeans that probably cost more than her monthly rent and a simple t-shirt that somehow looked more expensive than most people's formal wear. While his companions discussed business in serious tones, he seemed more interested in watching the people around him. His eyes were sharp and curious, like he was studying everyone and everything. When Jessica approached their table to take drink orders, she found herself humming again. It was a habit she had developed over the years, something that helped her stay calm during stressful shifts. Tonight she was humming a piece by Chopin, one of her favorites from her piano-playing days. The melody was complex and beautiful, the kind of music that could make you forget your troubles for a few minutes. The curious man looked up as she set down water glasses, and she realized he had been listening to her humming. Heat rushed to her cheeks as she stopped mid-melody, embarrassed that a customer had caught her being unprofessional. She quickly apologized and asked what they would like to drink, hoping to move past the awkward moment. But instead of ordering, the man smiled and said something that surprised her. That was Chopin, wasn't it? Nocturne in E-flat major? His voice was friendly, not mocking or condescending like she might have expected from someone in his position. Jessica nodded, still, feeling embarrassed but also a little impressed that he recognized the piece. Most people her age had never heard of Chopin, let alone could identify his work from a few hummed notes. Yes, sir, I'm sorry about that. What can I get you to drink? The man waved off her apology with a casual gesture. Don't be sorry. You have excellent taste in music. Do you play piano? There was genuine curiosity in his question, not the polite small talk that customers sometimes made. For a moment, Jessica hesitated. She could lie, keep things professional, stick to taking drink orders and moving on with her shift. But something about the man's interest seemed real, and she was tired of pretending her dreams didn't exist. I used to, she said quietly. I don't really get time to practice anymore." The man's business companions were growing impatient, checking their phones and glancing around the restaurant. They clearly wanted to get back to their meeting, but their friend seemed more interested in talking about music than closing deals. He leaned back in his chair, studying Jessica with those sharp, curious eyes. "Used to? That's a shame. Anyone who can hum Chopin with that much feeling should be playing, not just remembering." His words hit closer to home than Jessica was comfortable with. She felt tears threatening to form and blinked them back quickly. "Life gets in the way sometimes," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "Now, what can I get you? Gentlemen to drink?" This time the man let her take their orders, but Jessica could feel his eyes following her as she moved around the restaurant for the rest of the evening. Every time she passed their table, she caught him watching her with that same curious expression. It made her nervous and self-conscious, but also strangely hopeful in a way she couldn't quite explain. As the evening wore on, Jessica learned from other staff that the curious man was someone important in the tech world. Rich, successful, and known for being a little eccentric. The kind of person who could buy the entire restaurant without checking his bank balance. The kind of person whose life was so different from hers that they might as well be from different planets. When she brought their dinner, she was careful not to hum, but she couldn't help noticing that the man kept glancing toward the corner of the restaurant where a beautiful grand piano sat mostly unused. It was a gorgeous instrument, polished to perfection, that the restaurant brought out for special occasions but mostly kept as decoration. Jessica had noticed that piano on her first day of work. Sometimes during quiet moments she would stare at it and remember the feeling of keys under her fingers, the way music could fill a room and make everything else disappear. But those moments of nostalgia felt dangerous now, like opening old wounds that were trying to heal. The evening was winding down when everything changed. Jessica was clearing the neighboring table when she heard the man mention music again to his companions. Something about talent being wasted, about people giving up too easily on their dreams. His friend seemed bored by the topic, but he kept talking, his voice growing more animated. That's when he turned to Jessica, who was trying to work invisibly nearby, and said the words that would change everything. "You know what? I have an idea." Jessica's heart skipped a beat when she heard those words. "You know what? I have an idea." The wealthy man's voice carried a tone she couldn't quite read, excitement mixed with something that sounded almost mischievous. She tried to continue clearing the table, hoping whatever idea he had didn't involve her, but deep down she knew it was too late to pretend she hadn't heard him. The restaurant had grown quieter as the evening progressed. Most tables were finishing. Their meals and the usual dinner rush chatter had settled into softer conversations. The lighting was dim and warm, creating the kind of atmosphere that made people speak in hushed tones. But when the man pushed back his chair and stood up, the scraping sound seemed to echo through the entire dining room. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough that nearby tables turned to look. Jessica froze, still holding a stack of dirty plates, suddenly, aware that every eye in their section was focused on her. Her face burned with embarrassment as she realized whatever was about to happen would not be private. His business companions looked annoyed. One of them checked his watch and muttered something under his breath about having an early meeting tomorrow, but their friend ignored them completely, his attention fixed entirely on Jessica. She felt like a deer caught in headlights, unable to move or speak. "I've been thinking about what you said," he continued, his voice carrying easily through the quiet restaurant. "About how life gets in the way of music, about how you used to play piano but don't have time anymore." He gestured toward the grand piano in the corner, its black surface gleaming under the soft restaurant lighting. Jessica followed his gaze to the beautiful instrument she had admired so many times during her shifts. Tonight, it looked different, somehow, less like a decoration and more like a challenge. Her mouth went dry as she began to understand where this conversation was heading. "Here's what I'm thinking," the man said, and now other diners were openly staring at their conversation. Jessica could see her manager hovering near the kitchen door, looking nervous about whatever scene was unfolding in his restaurant. "That piano over there is just sitting empty. Has been all evening. Probably sits empty most nights. Jessica nodded slowly, not trusting her voice to speak. Her hands were trembling slightly as she held the plates, and she hoped no one could see how nervous she was becoming. "So here's my idea," he said, and his voice grew more animated, like he was getting excited about whatever plan was forming in his mind. "I want to make you a deal. A bet, if you will." The word bet made Jessica's stomach drop. She had heard enough stories about rich people making bets with working folks that ended badly. Her instinct was to politely decline whatever he was about to propose and get back to work. But something about his expression stopped her from walking away immediately. "I'll bet you're better at piano than you think you are," he continued. "I'll bet that all those years of practice, all that talent I heard in your humming, didn't just disappear because you got busy with life." One of his companions tried to interrupt. "Come on, we really should get going. We have that call with Tokyo in the morning." But the man held up a hand without looking away from Jessica. "Here's the deal," he said, his voice now carrying clearly through the restaurant. Jessica noticed that conversations at other tables had stopped entirely. Even the waitstaff had paused in their work to listen. "You play something on that piano. Anything you want. One song." Jessica's heart was pounding so hard she was afraid people could hear it. "Sir, I really can't. I'm working and I haven't played in months and—" Her voice trailed off as he shook his head. "Just hear me out," he said gently but firmly. "If you play, really play, not just hit a few keys, and if you can move this room, if you can make people feel something real." He paused for dramatic effect, and Jessica realized the entire restaurant was hanging on his words. "Then I'll take care of your brother's medical bills." The plates slipped from Jessica's hands and crashed to the floor. The sound of breaking china echoed through the silent restaurant like gunshots. She stared at the man in complete shock, unable to process what he had just said. How did he know about David? How did he know about the medical bills that kept her awake at night? "I make it my business to know things," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "And I know you're working double shifts to pay for your brother's treatment. I know you dropped out of music school to take care of your family. I know you're one of those people who sacrifices everything for the people they love." Jessica felt tears starting to form in her eyes. The broken plates lay scattered around her feet, but she couldn't move to clean them up. Other restaurant staff had started to gather, drawn by the commotion and the impossible conversation they were witnessing. "But here's the thing," the man continued, his voice softer now but still carrying to every corner of the room. "If you get up there and you're just okay, if you play something simple and safe, if you don't really try," he shrugged, "then you pay for your own dinner tonight, and we pretend this conversation never happened." The challenge hung in the air, like smoke. Jessica could feel dozens of eyes watching her, waiting to see what she would do. Her manager was making his way over, clearly unsure whether to intervene or let this strange scene continue. The man's business companions looked like they wanted to disappear under the table. "I can't," Jessica whispered, but even as she said it, she was thinking about David in his hospital bed, about the stack of bills on her kitchen table, about the dreams she had buried under the weight of responsibility. "You can," the man said with quiet confidence. "The question is whether you will." Jessica looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching her. Some looked curious, others sympathetic. A few seemed annoyed that their quiet dinner had been interrupted by this drama, but most looked genuinely interested in what would happen next, like they were watching a movie and couldn't wait to see how it ended. "I don't understand," Jessica said, her voice shaky. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." The man smiled, and for the first time since this conversation started, he looked almost normal instead of like some kind of eccentric millionaire making crazy bets in restaurants. "Because I've been where you are," he said simply. "Not exactly, but close enough. I know what it's like to have a gift and feel like the world won't let you use it." He gestured again toward the piano. "That instrument over there is worth more than most people make in a year. But right now it's just furniture. You could make it sing. You could make it matter." Jessica's manager finally reached their table. "Is everything okay here?" he asked nervously, looking back and forth between Jessica and the wealthy customer who was clearly important enough that the restaurant couldn't afford to offend him. "Everything's fine," the man said without breaking eye contact with Jessica. We're just discussing music. But Jessica knew it was about much more than music. It was about taking a chance when the stakes were impossibly high. It was about believing in herself when she had almost forgotten how. It was about the difference between dreaming and doing. The entire restaurant waited in silence for her answer. Time seemed to stop as Jessica stared at the grand piano in the corner. The entire restaurant had fallen silent, waiting for her decision. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, louder than any music she had ever played. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to keep anyone from noticing. The wealthy man stood patiently, his expression calm but expectant. His business partners looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Her manager hovered nearby, torn between protecting his employee and keeping an important customer happy. But it was the faces of the other diners that really got to Jessica. Some looked curious, others sympathetic, and a few seemed genuinely invested in what would happen next. I haven't played in months, Jessica said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I mess up? What if I can't remember how? The man's expression softened slightly. Then you'll be exactly where you are right now. Nothing lost, nothing gained. But what if you don't mess up? What if you remember exactly how it feels to make music? Jessica thought about David lying in his hospital bed, asking her when he could come home. She thought about the medical bills that arrived like clockwork every week, each one bigger than the last. She thought about her abandoned dreams, packed away like childhood toys she had outgrown. Most of all, she thought about the piano lessons she used to take, back when making music felt like the most natural thing in the world. Okay, she whispered, and then louder. Okay, I'll do it. A murmur ran through the restaurant like a wave. Some people shifted in their chairs to get a better view. Others pulled out their phones. Though whether to record the moment or call someone to tell them what was happening, Jessica couldn't tell. She untied her apron with trembling fingers and handed it to her manager, who took it wordlessly. The walk to the piano felt like the longest journey of her life. Each step echoed in the silent restaurant, and Jessica was acutely aware that every person in the room was watching her. She had performed before, back in school recitals and small competitions, but never with stakes this high. Never with her brother's future hanging in the balance. The piano bench was exactly the right height, she noticed as she sat down. Someone had maintained this instrument well, even if it rarely got used. She lifted the lid covering the keys, and the familiar sight of black and white keys brought back a flood of memories, late nights practicing scales, the satisfaction of finally mastering a difficult passage, the way music could make her forget everything else in the world. She placed her fingers on the keys but didn't press down yet. The restaurant remained absolutely silent, as if everyone was holding their breath. Jessica closed her eyes and tried to center herself, the way her old piano teacher had taught her. Feel the music before you play it, she used to say. Let it live in your heart first. What should she play? Something simple and safe just to get through this moment? Or something that truly mattered to her even if it was harder? Jessica thought about the Chopin nocturne she had been humming earlier, the piece that had started this whole impossible evening. It was challenging, full of delicate runs and emotional depth. If she was going to do this, she might as well do it right. She took a deep breath and pressed the first key. The note rang out clear and pure in the silent restaurant. Then the second note, and the third. The opening measures of Chopin's nocturne in E-flat major began to fill the room like water filling an empty vessel. Jessica's fingers were stiff at first, uncertain after months without practice. She hit one wrong note, then another, and for a moment she considered stopping, apologizing, and walking away. But then something magical happened. Her muscle memory began to take over. Her fingers found their rhythm, and the stiffness melted away. The melody began to flow more naturally, each note connecting to the next like links in a chain. The piano responded to her touch like an old friend welcoming her home. Jessica forgot about the watching crowd. She forgot about the impossible bet and the medical bills and everything else that had been weighing on her shoulders for months. There was only the music, Only the conversation between her fingers and the keys. Only the story that Chopin had written over a century ago, but that she was telling fresh and new in this moment. The nocturne built to its first climax, a cascade of notes that seemed to sparkle in the air. Jessica's right hand danced across the higher keys while her left hand provided the steady, heartbeat rhythm that anchored the piece. She could feel the music flowing through her like electricity, connecting her to something larger than herself. As she moved into the middle section of the piece, Jessica began to add her own interpretation. She slowed certain passages, letting the emotion breathe. She emphasized the melancholy beauty of the minor sections and made the major key moments shine like sunlight breaking through clouds. This wasn't just technical playing anymore. This was storytelling. The restaurant had become something other than a restaurant. It was a concert hall, a sacred space where something extraordinary was happening. Jessica could sense the change even with her eyes closed. The atmosphere had shifted, from curious observation to genuine captivation. People weren't just watching anymore, they were listening with their whole beings. She thought about David as she played the most tender section of the nocturne, about how music used to be their escape when their parents worked late and they were home alone, how she would play simple melodies while he did his homework, and how he would always stop to listen when she played something particularly beautiful, about how he had told her she shouldn't give up music even when the bills started piling up. The piece began building toward its final climax, and Jessica felt herself pouring every ounce of emotion she possessed into the keys. All the fear about David's illness, all the exhaustion from working double shifts, all the grief for her abandoned dreams, all the hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Every feeling she had buried under the weight of responsibility came flowing out through her fingertips. The final section of the nocturne was the most challenging, requiring both technical precision and deep emotional understanding. Jessica's hands moved across the keyboard with increasing confidence, painting pictures with sound. She could feel the music reaching every corner of the restaurant, touching hearts and stirring memories in ways that words never could. As she approached the ending, Jessica made a choice that surprised even her. Instead of playing the final measures exactly as written, she slowed them down even more, making each note precious and deliberate. She wanted this moment to last, wanted to hold on to the feeling of being completely herself for just a little longer. The last note hung in the air like a prayer, gradually fading until the restaurant returned to complete silence. But it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of before. This was the silence that follows something beautiful, the moment when people need time to absorb what they've just experienced. Jessica kept her hands on the keys and her eyes closed, afraid to open them and return to the real world. She had done it. She had played not just competently, but with everything she had. Now all that remained was to find out if it had been enough. The silence stretched on forever. Jessica sat at the piano bench with her eyes still closed, her hands resting gently on the keys that had just carried her through the most important performance of her life. She could feel her heart beating rapidly, but the rest of the world seemed frozen in time. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the usual restaurant sounds of clinking glasses and quiet conversations had completely disappeared. She was afraid to open her eyes. What if she saw disappointment on people's faces? What if the wealthy man was already reaching for his wallet to pay his bill and leave? What if she had just made a fool of herself in front of a room full of strangers? The silence felt heavy, loaded with judgment she wasn't sure she was ready to face. But slowly, Jessica became aware that this wasn't the silence of embarrassment or polite waiting. This was something else entirely. She could sense the weight of attention in the room, but it felt different now than it had before she started playing. Before, people had been curious, maybe even skeptical. Now the energy in the room felt charged, electric, like the moment right before a thunderstorm when the air itself seems to hold its breath. Finally, she opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the wealthy man who had challenged her. He was still standing near his table, but his expression had completely changed. Gone was the confident, almost playful look he'd worn earlier. Instead, his face showed something Jessica had never expected to see from someone so successful and self-assured. He looked genuinely moved, even a little stunned. His mouth was slightly open, as if he had been about to say something but forgot what it was. Jessica turned slightly to look at the rest of the restaurant, and what she saw took her breath away. Every single person was staring at her, but not with the casual curiosity of dinner guests watching entertainment. These were faces transformed by music. An elderly woman at a corner table had tears streaming down her cheeks, not bothering to wipe them away. A businessman who had been impatiently checking his phone all evening now sat with his device forgotten on the table, his full attention focused on the piano. Near the kitchen, she could see the restaurant staff clustering together. Her manager stood with his arms crossed, but his usual stern expression had softened into something like wonder. Two other waitresses she worked with regularly looked at her as if they were seeing her for the first time. Even the cooks had emerged from the kitchen, their white aprons smudged with evidence of the evening's work, but their faces clean of everything except amazement. The silence continued to stretch, and Jessica began to understand that no one quite knew how to break it. It was as if her music had cast a spell over the entire room, and speaking would somehow diminish what had just happened. She had played before, of course, but never had she seen music affect people like this. Never had she felt the power of her own playing so strongly. A young couple at a nearby table sat holding hands across their small table, both of them looking at Jessica with expressions of deep appreciation. The woman's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and her partner squeezed her hand gently, as if the music had reminded them of something beautiful about their own relationship. At another table, a father had his arm around his teenage daughter, both of them completely absorbed in the moment they had just witnessed. Jessica realized that what she was seeing wasn't just appreciation for good playing. These people had been transported somewhere else by her music. They had felt something real, something that connected to their own lives and experiences. The Chopin nocturne she had chosen was a piece about longing and beauty, and the bittersweetness of life, and somehow she had managed to communicate all of that through her fingertips. The wealthy man finally found his voice, but when he spoke, it was barely above a whisper. He stopped, shook his head slightly, and tried again. I've heard professional concerts that didn't move me half as much as what you just played. His words seemed to break the spell that had held the room captive. Like dominoes falling, the silence began to crack. It started with one person, an older gentleman sitting alone near the window, who began to clap slowly and deliberately. The sound echoed through the restaurant like the first drops of rain after a long drought. Then others joined in. The elderly woman with tears on her cheeks started clapping, still crying, but now smiling through her tears. The businessman put down his phone and added his applause. The young couple clapped while still holding hands, never taking their eyes off Jessica. Within moments, the entire restaurant had erupted into applause that was unlike anything Jessica had ever heard. This wasn't the polite, expected clapping that happened at the end of school recitals. This wasn't the dutiful appreciation that audiences gave to competent performances. This was applause that came from the heart, applause that said, "Thank you for giving us something beautiful." Applause that recognized not just technical skill, but genuine artistry. People began to stand. First one person, then another, then whole tables rising to their feet. Jessica sat at the piano bench in complete shock as she realized she was receiving a standing ovation in a restaurant that had been serving dinner just minutes before. The applause grew louder and more enthusiastic, and she could see people wiping away tears while they clapped. The wealthy man was applauding too, but his face showed more than just appreciation. He looked almost awed, as if he had expected to hear someone play piano but instead had witnessed something much more significant. His business companions, who had seemed so impatient earlier, now stood and clapped with genuine enthusiasm. Jessica's manager approached the piano, his expression completely transformed from the nervous worry he had shown during the challenge. "Jessica," he said, his voice full of emotion, "I had no idea. In all the months you've worked here, I never knew you could do something like this." The applause continued for what felt like forever. Jessica tried to stand up from the piano bench, but her legs felt shaky from the adrenaline and emotion of the moment. She managed a small wave to acknowledge the appreciation, which only made people clap harder. Some diners were calling out words of encouragement and praise. "Beautiful," someone shouted from across the room. "Absolutely beautiful. Play something else," called out another voice, though Jessica wasn't sure she could handle the emotional intensity of another performance right now. As the applause finally began to die down and people started to return to their seats, Jessica remained standing next to the piano. She felt different somehow, like something inside her had been awakened after a long sleep. For months she had been so focused on survival, on paying bills and getting through each day, that she had forgotten how it felt to truly be herself. The wealthy man walked over to where she stood, his expression serious but warm. The room had returned to a low buzz of conversation, but Jessica could feel that the energy was still different. People kept glancing over at her, smiling, as if she had given them all a gift they hadn't expected to receive. "Well," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "I think we can safely say you moved the room." Jessica stood next to the piano, still trying to process what had just happened. The wealthy man's words echoed in her mind. "I think we can safely say you moved the room." Around them, the restaurant was slowly returning to normal, but she could feel that something fundamental had shifted. People were still glancing her way with smiles and appreciation, as if she had become someone completely different in the span of a single song. "I keep my promises," the man said quietly, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone and began typing something quickly. "What's your brother's name and which hospital is he at?" Jessica felt her knees go weak. Throughout the entire evening, part of her hadn't quite believed this was real. Rich people didn't just walk into restaurants and change lives with piano challenges. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her who worked double shifts and worried about bills. But here he was, phone in hand, ready to follow through on his impossible offer. "David Martinez," she whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. "He's at General Hospital, room 314. But sir, I don't understand why you're doing this. You don't even know us." The man looked up from his phone, and his expression was more serious than she had seen all evening. "5 years ago, I was broke and living in my car, trying to get my first tech company off the ground. I had written code that I knew could change things, but no one would give me a chance because I didn't have the right background or connections." He continued typing as he spoke, and Jessica could see numbers on his screen that made her head spin. "One night I was in a coffee shop that stayed open late, using their free Wi-Fi to send out job applications. I must have looked pretty desperate because this older woman sitting nearby started talking to me. She was just a regular person, a retired teacher, but she listened to my ideas and believed in them when no one else would." Jessica watched in amazement as he completed what looked like an online bank transfer. The amount was more money than she had ever seen in one place. More than enough to cover David's surgery and all the medical bills that had been keeping her awake at night. "She gave me $5,000, he continued, putting his phone away. "Her entire savings account, just because she thought I had potential. She said talent deserves a chance no matter where it comes from." He smiled at Jessica. "Your brother's medical bills are taken care of. The hospital will have the payment within the hour." Jessica felt tears streaming down her face. She tried to speak, but couldn't find words. This couldn't be real. People didn't just write checks to solve other people's problems. But her phone buzzed with a text from the hospital billing department, confirming that David's account had been paid in full. "But that's not all," the man said, and Jessica looked up at him through her tears. "That performance tonight proved something I suspected from the moment I heard you humming. You have a gift that needs to be shared with the world. Have you ever heard of the Berkshire Music Academy?" Jessica nodded slowly. It was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country, the kind of place she had dreamed about but never dared to apply to. The tuition alone cost more than she made in 2 years. "My company sponsors several students there every year," he explained. "Full scholarship, living expenses, everything. I'm going to make sure you're one of them, if you want to be." Jessica sank back down onto the piano bench, overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of her entire life. "I can't accept this," she said weakly. "It's too much. I don't deserve it." You absolutely deserve it," said a voice behind her. Jessica turned to see the elderly woman who had been crying during her performance. She had walked over from her table, still dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. You made me remember why I fell in love with music in the first place." Other diners began approaching the piano area, the young couple from nearby, the businessman who had put away his phone, even some of the restaurant staff. Everyone wanted to thank Jessica, to tell her how her music had affected them. She heard story after story about memories her playing had triggered, emotions she had helped people feel, moments of beauty in their busy lives. "I used to play piano when I was young," said the businessman, shaking Jessica's hand. "Haven't touched the keys in 20 years, but hearing you tonight makes me want to start again." The young woman from the couple squeezed Jessica's hand gently. "My grandmother used to play that same piece for me when I was little. She passed away last month, and hearing you play it felt like she was in the room with me again." Jessica's manager approached, looking emotional and slightly embarrassed. "Jessica, I owe you an apology. I had no idea what kind of talent was working in my restaurant. If you ever want to come back and play for guests, we'd be honored to have you." As people shared their stories, Jessica began to understand something important. Her music hadn't just entertained people tonight. It had connected them to memories, to feelings, to parts of themselves they had forgotten. She had given them something valuable without even realizing it. The wealthy man waited patiently while Jessica spoke with the other diners. When the crowd finally began to disperse, he approached her again. "I want you to know that this isn't charity," he said seriously. "This is an investment. I believe you have the potential to touch millions of lives with your music, the way you touched everyone in this room tonight." He handed her a business card with simple black text. "My assistant will call you tomorrow with details about the scholarship and enrollment process. But there's one condition." Jessica looked at him nervously, wondering what catch there might be to this incredible generosity. "You have to promise me that you'll never give up on your music again," he said. "No matter what life throws at you, no matter how hard things get, you keep playing. The world needs what you have to offer." Jessica nodded, still crying but now smiling through her tears. "I promise." 6 months later, Jessica stood on the stage of one of the most prestigious concert halls in the city. She wore a simple black dress and felt the familiar weight of anticipation that came before a performance. In the audience, she could see David in the front row, healthy and smiling after his successful surgery. Next to him sat her parents, who had driven 4 hours to watch their daughter's debut concert. Also in the audience was the wealthy man who had changed her life, along with several people from that magical night at the restaurant. The elderly woman who had cried during her performance, the young couple who had held hands while listening, even her former manager who had driven up for the evening. As Jessica placed her hands on the piano keys, she thought about that night when her life had changed forever. She had learned that talent alone wasn't enough, but talent combined with courage and opportunity could create miracles. She had also learned that music was more than just notes and rhythms. It was a language that could speak directly to people's hearts. She began to play, and once again the room fell silent. But this time Jessica wasn't afraid of the silence. She knew it meant people were listening with their whole beings, ready to be transported by the music she was about to share. The first notes of her performance rang out clear and beautiful, carrying with them all the hope and gratitude and joy that had brought her to this moment. In the audience, people settled back in their seats, ready to be moved once again by the waitress, who had become a pianist, the dreamer who had found her way back to her dreams.